You are now listening to About That Business, hosted by Rom Wills. Rom Wills is an entrepreneur and personal coach who has helped people reach their fullest potential personally and professionally. Take it away, Rom.
Thank you, Marshall. Today I'm going to talk about the business of writing. Now, in different places, I talked about how I got started in writing. I had an itch and, I just went with it. But from the business side of it, it was always important that I make money from that. I didn't want it to be just something I just did on the side, but I actually wanted to be able to live based on writing. And I can honestly say I've done that twice in my life. That was, when my book Nice Guys and Players first came out. I was able to live a long time on that, but then there were some stuff that went on in the publishing industry that kind of put a damper on that for a little bit. And now, so for a few years, I was, doing some other things to bring some money in, even though I still had a little publishing company. But then recently, just really getting back into it and really adapting to the current publishing market, I'm back to a point where I can, I'm making enough money to live on again, and more than live on, in fact. Now, when we talk about the business of writing, right, and this ain't going to be so much a how-to or whatnot, but just I'm going to make it more personal, right? Make this one a little bit more personal because this one is something that, I've actually went through. Now, it's funny when I've said this before and I'll share it with you again. When I first started writing, and I would tell a lot of people, particularly women, what I wanted to do. The only question most of them had was, how you going to support somebody with that? And writers don't make that much money. And just like, are you kidding me? It was just, but see, a lot of people, they're stuck into thinking only certain things make money. Because of writing, I like the highest salary I've ever made working for somebody was actually as an editor for a website, a political website back in the day. I was one of its editors. That's the highest amount of money I've ever made working for somebody. And I'm somebody who's worked in the government. But yet the most money I ever made working for somebody was as an editor, which was writing. See, a lot of times when those women back in the day were talking about writing, they didn't really realize how far you could go with it. They was just like, they thinking about the art side, but see, they're not thinking, well, you know what, he could write for a website, he could write for a magazine, he could even write for a newspaper. Because for a little while, even though I wasn't formally trained as a journalist, I was doing journalistic work. And even investigative journalism, even though I wasn't formally trained in that field. See, that was one way. But, the way I decided to really make money was through publishing and developing a publishing company. See, the thing with writing, that's just the base. But there's so far you can take it. Because I started with the publishing, but also wrote articles for a website. Like I said, eventually became an editor for that website. But I was making money through the books. That was making money because since I had my own publishing company and I wasn't getting a little bit of a cut with my books with someone else, signed to a publishing company, I was getting a bigger cut out of the sales I was making, a way bigger cut. Instead of like say a royalty of $1, and actually $1 is a big royalty, even this day that's a big royalty. I was getting a royalty of like off of maybe a $10 book. Some cases I was probably getting $10, and then you take away the cost of actually printing the book. I was probably getting a profit of like $8. So I mean, I started there, and then the publishing that led to other things. Me being on cable TV, getting radio interviews. Since I got good at actually selling those books, I decided to sell other people's books. So I had a book stand for a couple years. So it's, the business of it, because it's so far you can go with it. And even just writing, if you don't want to get into that aspect of it, think about it. Okay, you write a book, right? All of a sudden, somebody sees it who wants to do a movie. And I've actually had 2 books that people looked at to do movies. Like I did a book back in the day. It was called Mask, right? And I might put that one back out. I might like kind of rework it because my writing style has changed in 20 years. So when I look at it now, I was like, wow, I gotta change the flow of it. My flow is a whole lot more better when I write fiction, right? Because one thing as a writer, just as an aside, or any art, you always want to improve it. You don't want to be saying, you know what, my style is the same as it was 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. There's a big difference in my style. So I might rewrite that book. But ironically, it was still good enough. There was an independent director who actually was going to do a film on it. But, that gets into the business of filmmaking. It's hard to get a movie produced. It really is. Even back then. It would have took a lot of money. There's a lot of politics involved, and plus back then they didn't have that technology where someone could just take a camera and do it themselves. Now it was a lot different back then. But even then, just based on that book and then a script based on that book, there were some minor celebrities. I could drop some names who showed interest in the project, like some people, like some. I was just say some black actors from back in the day whose names people would recognize easily, right? They were attached to it, but it fell through. But it is what it is. But see, that's another way, though. I mean, you're talking scripts, and especially in this day and age, there's a big market for like web series. I'm surprised there isn't more. A lot of people are doing them, but there's room for so much more, like just storytelling, fiction. Because even like a lot of these YouTube videos, a lot of people, even the ones that are serious and ranting or whatever, clowning, people watching it for the story. The power of the story itself. I mean, you get whole cultures based on the story. That's powerful. People need that. See, people need their bodies fed, but they also need their minds fed. That's mythology. That's everything. So somebody who writes a good story, they can eat forever. Look at Star Wars. If you really look at George Lucas, even though he did some other things, he was billionaire based on one story. Because he kept adding to the story, and there was so much. And even with writing now, because if I created like a good sci-fi universe, or like any universe, there's a way on Amazon. It's called Amazon Worlds, where I can license out the characters or the the general dynamics of whatever universe I create to other writers, and they can create their own stuff. And Rom gets a cut for not even just creating the characters to begin with. And I mean, that's powerful. I mean, there's so much you can do with writing. It's like when I look at, I'm gonna be honest, when I look at how I'm living now, what I've accomplished, what I'm doing all over the world. And I'm just using myself as an example. I ain't really bragging, because I'm really humble and thankful for everything. But it was all because of writing. Everything. So, then there's a lot of people who got some great story ideas and everything. Like every time I meet somebody and they say, hey, I got a great story, I'll be like, just write. Or they got some type of story to tell, even if it's their own personal story, I say, just write. Because you can go so far with it. Because a second ago I was talking about web series. The beauty of the net now, one, you can publish a book without even publishing a hardcover. You can publish an ebook and make money easily. Once you upload it, it was like, boom, it goes all over the world. You can just do that story, or, like I said, you can do a web series, you can write a script, get a major movie made for all of that. All based on the story. I got a dude I know, he's actually produced a couple plays, and when he started out, just with a book. I mean, there is so much you can do with it. I mean, you can create entire industries based on just writing something. You know, you could write a story that takes off so much. You can create movies, products, shoot, even clothing lines, just based off of writing something. So, you know, it's powerful because I have a personal example myself. You know, I've gotten so far just because I decided to say, hey, you know what? I like writing stories. And that really goes back to, well, it's funny. It goes back to when I was a kid. I wrote a story when I was 7 years old about ants and a society of ants. And then, of course, years later, you know, Pixar and a couple other animated studios made movies about, guess what else? Ants. You know, and then in college, I wrote some skits for like a show that, you know, a group of us did every year at the school, right? You know, because I was like, you know what, we need some lines in this joint. I love it, man. But you could go so far, man. And I'm gonna tell you what, just writing, just on a personal level, just brings me joy. I just love it. There's nothing like it. So anyway, think about that. That's, you know what, the business of writing. You can actually go a long way if you can put together shit. I've seen movies and stuff made out of short stories. So if you can just put together an entertaining story, really get into it, not only would you have an outlet for creativity, but you have a potential great money making tool on your hands. You know, engine on your hands, right? So anyway, that's it for today. Let's go make that money.